Hello, Socrates at Saddlebrook. Today is part 2 of Privileged Planet Earth. And as you recall, in part 1, we looked at our home planet and discovered that not only is it remarkable, but it's also privileged to the point of having so many just right conditions finely tuned for our existence. It's either a miracle or a near miracle that we humans even exist. My last video cast was a bonus video regarding the question, is there life anywhere else in the universe? Are we alone? And I posed several questions to you. Given that there's so many exoplanets outside our own solar system, today there's more than 4,000 of them, do you think that it is probable that life exists anywhere else in the universe? Or is it more probable that life on Earth is totally unique? In which direction do you think the evidence will point? Well, today we are going to review that evidence and arrive at some conclusions. But before we blast off, I want to make sure that we're fully equipped to examine all the data. I'm calibrated to make sure that I understand the number of planets out there. And I'm calibrated here to make sure that we get the just right conditions for planet Earth. And are you open to ET? Yeah, I have my special ET investigative gear on, so I'm tuned in to find the possibility of ET on other planets. So let's get ready to blast off. Are we alone? Does ET exist? Proposition goes something like this. Since there are so many billions of stars out there, there must be millions and millions of other solar systems and planets like ours. Some of them must also just have the right conditions for life. So the first thing I want you to note, however, is that this is not a scientific conclusion. We haven't found life. We have no way of even projecting that. We don't have a data point. It's only speculation based on the huge number of stars that we are discovering. And an amazing fact, the laws of nature just aren't here on planet Earth. They exist on the Moon, Mars, solar system, out there in the Milky Way and beyond. But also note, there's two sides to this equation. On one side, there's this prospective number of planets. And number two, what's the probability that any one of the planets will have all the just right conditions? So we're going to attempt to answer that. But to do that, we must do the math. Yeah, math, and I love it. You might review part 1 again to understand the just right conditions that must be met. In it, I said could be as many as 250 of these independent just right conditions for privileged planet Earth to exist. And I only unpacked 6 of them, that's all. And I explained, though, that the setting of any of these conditions is like setting a dial to a very precise number. I mean, as an illustration, think about the thermostat in your house, setting that dial to 72 degrees. Now, imagine there's another 249 similar but independent dials that must also be set. So everything operate flawlessly. We want Siri to operate everything flawlessly. So we set all 249, 250 dials so our life just goes perfect and we can say something like, hey Siri, set all my dials so I can exist. Now, remember, all these dials must be set exactly right. So Siri, don't screw up. Just right conditions all have to be set precisely, and I proposed in part 1 that natural law and chance can't do the job to set the dials correctly. And neither can Siri unless she's been pre-programmed beforehand by some kind of designing intelligence. I mean, I hate to think what would happen if Siri weren't pre-programmed and she was turned loose to randomly set the dials to whatever. Today I will attempt to show that natural law and chance are not capable, even in principle, to get the job done without being pre-programmed. To illustrate now, I'm going to take just 35 dials out of the 250. I'm just going to select those at random, 250 dials, 35 selected at random, and let's say that each one of them must be set within 1% of the just right requirement. 1% of 72 degrees, for example. Not just fine-tuned to a hair breadth, but within 1%. Now, we're going to calculate the probability that any one planet in the universe could have all 35 dials set just right by natural law and chance alone. No pre-programming is allowed by any kind of designing intelligence. And here's the math. First, we must calculate the number of candidate planets. So let's assume there's 100 billion galaxies out there, and each galaxy contains 100 billion stars. And let's be generous and say 1% of all those stars have a planet that is Earth-like. That's a huge number of planets. We could easily assume with those kind of numbers that there must be other Earth-like planets. So here's the math. 100 billion galaxies times 100 billion stars times 1%, that's blah, 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 I can't even say it. That's 1 followed by 20 zeros, or in scientific notation, 10 to the 20th power. That's an amazing, gigantic number of candidate planets. It's 100 billion Earth-like planets that's available. But remember, number 2, for any one planet to have life, it must meet all the just right conditions. And there's 35 of them, right? So we need to make a calculation of that as well. And here's the probability calculation. There are 35 just right conditions that must be met within 1%. To calculate the probability that the 1% will be met for all 35 is 1% times 1% times 1%. In other words, 0.01 times 0.01, 35 times. That number is, when we figure it out, 0.00000 for 69 zeros, and then the 1. In scientific notation, that's 10 to the minus 70th power. That is probability. That will be the probability that any one planet will meet all 35 conditions, or the 1%, just right. Now that's an astronomically small number, but on the other hand, we have billions and billions and billions of candidate planets, right? So to find the probability that any one of those candidates will meet the just right conditions, we must multiply the two numbers together. In scientific notation, 10 to the 20th power times 10 to the minus 70th power equals 10 to the minus 50th power. Another way of saying that is that the probability of any one of the candidate planets will have life is 1 chance in 100,000 trillion. That's an astronomically small number. In fact, it borders on what some mathematicians consider impossible on a practical level, or statistically impossible in reality. And remember, if we were to increase the number of just right conditions from 35, or tighten the requirement down to minuscule from 1%, we exponentially and rapidly decrease that odds even further. So, statistically speaking, life on other planets is impossible by chance and natural law, given the abundance of just right conditions that must be met. Here's what 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power looks like. 1 chance, try saying it in millions, billions, trillions, whatever. It's difficult to say, let alone comprehend. And that's just the entry point for the impossibility boundary. Add just a few more just right conditions in 35 and increase it gradually up to 250, makes the odds hyper exponential. When is something impossible? What's 1 chance in what? Well, Emile Borel, a French mathematician, set a lower bound of practical impossibility at 1 chance in 10 to the 50th. And here's what that looks like. 1 chance in In fact, if that's impossible, let's add just one more factor, but let's make it a fundamental factor. It's a just right condition that puts it not only out of reach, statistical reach, but out of the realm of even comprehensibility. It's called the initial entropy of the Big Bang. Big sounding name, but really what it is, it's just a measure of the disorder of the initial state of the universe. And believe it or not, that can be calculated. That probability has been calculated to be, catch this now, 1 chance in 10 billion raised to the 123rd power. I'll say it again. 1 billion raised to the 123rd power. That's a number so big it can't even be written out. It would take more zeros to write that out than there's subatomic particles in the entire universe. Why are we so afraid to use the word miracle? It's a word that's been banished from the academy. Even theists have difficulty in the current naturalistic climate. At least theist scientists have difficulty. But today, more and more scientists who have done these calculations, many of whom are self-declared atheists, have started to use descriptions of their finding using language like miracle. The scientific literature is replete with quotes by world-class scientists like Fred Hoyle that we saw last week, irrespective of their religious positions, that the fine-tuning of the universe is, at minimum, almost a miracle. Some will even go further. Professor George Greenstein, physicist and professor emeritus of astronomy at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and a self-declared atheist, put his surprise to the calculation this way. The thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or rather agency with a capital A, must be involved. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending, we have stumbled across scientific proof for the existence of a supreme being? Was it a God who providentially stepped in and crafted the cosmos for our benefit? In other words, is it God who set all the dials and pre-programmed planet Earth for us? Theists affirm miracles, but even they oftentimes are reluctant to call it a miracle in the sense of God intervening, and they resort to hedging their bet. I asked you in the last video cast for your opinion about the possibility of life on other planets, and some of you have replied and asked me for mine. So here it is. In the light of the data, and personally going through the research materials myself and doing the calculations, I must conclude we are alone. Planet Earth and life on it is totally unique. The probability analysis tells me that no number of planets in all the galaxies, even if we've underestimated it by billions of billions, could possibly overcome the odds of just right conditions required for life to exist elsewhere. And it doesn't make any difference to me that any new laws will be discovered, or it doesn't make sense, I should say, to me, that will turn this around. For example, the hypothetical multiverse, where there's multiple, infinite number of universes out there, and they can do anything they want to do, well, which is not a scientific conclusion, sheer speculation, because it's a transcendent faith position. But let's say, even if it was supposed to be true, even if it was to be true, yet discover new laws, they themselves, those new laws, would have to be fine-tuned. And if they weren't fine-tuned, where'd they come from? They didn't appear out of nowhere in the last 14 billion years. Nevertheless, as one of my professors used to say, nothing is impossible except squeezing paste back into the tube. Well, there's always the possibility of new evidence and ways of putting the toothpaste back, so I must maintain a Socrates open mind on this. But for now, you heard my conclusion. And for those of you who disagree, there is still hope for you. But I ask you to think about it the next time you brush your teeth. I've been asked by my theist friends, well, what does the Bible say about life on other planets? Well, it's silent on the matter. But I did find the following verses interesting, depending on how one chooses to interpret them. God created humankind and made them in the image of God. God created humankind just a little lower than himself. God created humankind for his own purposes. And this one I found fascinating. God created the world and humankind to live on the face of the earth and appointed the times and boundaries of their habitation. Next topic I promised to discuss with you is what popular science and what the popular science shows call the Copernican principle. My conclusion was based on the current evidence from science and math. It is not the popular impression given to the public or by the media. Today's science popularizers, such as Cosmos, as conceived by Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, the science guy, Richard Dawkins and the God Delusion, the National Geographic Channel, they all tell us that the evidence from the Copernican principle should lead us in the other direction, that life is abundant. The Earth, they say, is nothing special, and neither are we. The universe must be filled with other life, so get over the pride of you being so special. Copernicus, they say, showed us that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and neither should we believe that. The old model was incorrect, and it was religiously motivated. The hard science of today has shown planet Earth is just a commonplace tiny speck of rock in a hostile universe. Therefore, Earth is hardly a privileged planet or a unique habitat. So what is the Copernican principle, and are these allegations justified? We have discussed in the history of science in session 1 regarding cosmology. And for 1,500 years, the standard understanding by everyone, not just the church, was that the Earth was the center of the universe and that the sun, moon, and planets revolved around it. As the early scientists, however, peered into their newly invented telescope and attempted to better explain the motion of the heavenly bodies, this ancient model became problematic. Copernicus was in the 16th century. Initially, he came up with a better model that put the sun at the center, with the Earth going around it. Galileo confirmed it. This proved to be the correct view, but change came slowly. Yes, particularly within the church. That resistance to readily accept the new scientific view, however, has been exploited today by those who are not sympathetic to science and faith cooperating. In fact, in many venues, faith is portrayed as an inhibitor to scientific progress. As you know by now, however, I favor the cooperation between science and faith. The Socrates' big question for the year is, how has science rediscovered a creator? What does the scientific evidence reveal? If faith-based propositions are arbitrarily excluded from the discussion, then there is nothing to evaluate. If evidence for God can't even be put on the table, let alone evaluated, then it's being censored. And unfortunately, that's the position of naturalism today, and it dominates the scientific academy. Naturalism, as we have seen, is an atheistic philosophy that the cosmos is all there is, all there ever was, all there ever will be. And if that's true, then by definition, not evidence, but by definition, then no amount of evidence can be garnered to argue otherwise. Unfortunately, science-based journalism and TV documentaries are so heavily biased toward naturalism, we hardly ever hear evidence for God. I mean, and the poster child of this movement for the past 30 years has been the Cosmos series, which today is in its third incarnation. We will also see this bias in the history of modern science, that it's filtered through this worldview of naturalism. Exhibit 1 is Copernicus himself will testify. Copernicus was a Christian and was motivated by his faith to study the heavens and to glorify God. He's being misrepresented by this rubric, the Copernican principle, which was given this name just in the last century. The Copernican principle was not formulated by Copernicus, but by others who came centuries later and wanted to demote Earth by emphasizing that it no longer was the center of the universe. The demotion is usually accompanied by portraying the church as standing in the way of scientific progress and promoting superstition. A great many intelligent people simply assumed this stereotype to be true, even though for decades modern historians of science have shown this assumption to be false. These portrayals are supplemented many times with tales of persecution horrors, Galileo being brought before the Inquisition, and the elevation of a Dominican monk, Giordano Bruno, who has been declared a scientist and was burned at the stake for his scientific beliefs. Truth be told, and good history of science books will confirm it, yes, the Inquisition was a dark chapter in church history. And yes, Galileo was unjustly placed under house arrest for his Copernican view. But even then, he received a lifelong pension from the church and lived and died comfortably. Copernicus was never persecuted for his views. Yes, Bruno was martyred in the Inquisition, but not because of his science. He was not a scientist. He was an occultist. He was martyred for his heretical teachings about God. His belief in heliocentrism was incidental to his heretical views, which included belief in Egyptian gods, not the God of the Bible, Christ not being God, no incarnation, no salvation in Christ, among other minor doctrinal matters. Also, those who want to pit faith against science like to portray the Earth as an insignificant place in the cosmos, and that man is likewise insignificant. And that belief in God is a dark force in the world. Naturalism, on the other hand, is the light of the world, even the savior of mankind. To add this to this devaluation of planet Earth is its portrayal of an accidental Earth as an accidental speck of dust and could not possibly hold any privileged position in the universe. To promote this view, Carl Sagan and today Neil deGrasse Tyson used a spectacular picture, beautiful picture, taken by Voyager 1 in 1990 from 4 billion miles away. From that distance, this photo shows Earth as a tiny pale blue dot bathed in a ray of sunlight. It certainly leaves one with awe and wonder. Sagan writes in his book, The Pale Blue Dot, quote, "Because of this, the reflection of sunlight, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light as if there was some special significance to the small world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. Our posturing, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark, and in our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help would come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves." To which God might answer Dr. Sagan, as he did Job in chapter 38, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone?" The Copernican principle, sometimes even called the principle of mediocrity, promotes that religion is at war with science and that faith opposes intellectual achievement. It is used to dishonestly, in my view, trace the conflict back to Bruno being burned at the stake for his progressive scientific views, Christianity being an enemy of science. In part one of the series, Science and Faith, I explained that the Judeo-Christian worldview actually helped give birth to modern science. It was one of the important catalysts. The early founders, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, etc., were all committed and motivated to understand God through his creation and give him glory. In Interview, on the other hand, the producers of Cosmos candidly state their goal is to promote naturalism. Now remember, naturalism is not science. It's an atheistic philosophical position imposed on science that has deftly substituted itself for science. Science in its original form is a pursuit of the truth regarding the world around us. And it's the scientific method, not just a pursuit of a materialistic understanding of it. Unfortunately, activists today are willing to rewrite history to promote their naturalistic agenda. The actual history of the 16th century, when Copernicus developed this theory, shows, yes, planet Earth was thought to be the center of the universe, but that was not considered even a place of honor. Earth, particularly the center of the Earth, was considered to be the bottom of the universe, quite literally hell. Think of Dante's Inferno. The New Testament portrays Christ descending into the lower parts of the earth, hell, as well as ascending into heaven. To the Jew, to the Christian, to the Muslim, the universe is God-centered, not earth or man-centered. People of the book, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, are taught to look up into the heavens to see the glory of God. They are taught to seek salvation from God, not from man. That's humanism. And certainly not from the universe. That's naturalism. The psalmist in Psalm 19 put it this way: the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. Their voice goes out to all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. The church eventually released itself from the ancient Greek understanding that the earth was supposedly the center of the universe. That was one of the motivations for the first scientists to seek God by exploring his heavens. Copernicus actually released people from their own self-importance to seek after God. Earth was now freed from being perceived as the bottom of the universe and free to roam the heavens to explore to see God up there. Yet, Satan's haunting rhetoric persists. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark, in our obscurity, in all this vastness. And in his defense, it does cause us to question, why is Earth so tiny in relation to the size of the universe? Where is any indication in all this obscurity and vastness, a proclamation of God's intention and purpose for mankind? How can our living 80 years or so be significant in comparison to the 14 billion years of Big Bang evolution? Take a deep thinking Socrates moment on that one. Let me start giving an answer, trying to give an answer by changing the perspective. Think of lovers, that 1 in a million lady you want to spend the rest of your life with. She is actually 1 in a billion. In fact, 1 in 8 billion, current world population. But she is the one that shines in your sunbeam. The other 8 billion don't matter. The fact they exist as well only makes her even more significant, not less. We can even say that she is so special, has so many just right qualities, that statistically, she should not even exist. Might that not nudge you to consider that her existence may be intentional? So, in conclusion, we must think deeply about these things and research the evidence for ourselves. Whether or not our planet has been intentionally designed for us is one of the most intriguing big questions, as it has such profound personal consequences. So I encourage you, do your own research on this, even your own calculations. Evaluate the evidence. Separate the facts from the chaff. Research the historical facts. The Copernican principle has nothing to do with Copernicus. His name was co-opted by a philosophical movement to promote naturalism. Research the scientific facts. Life in the universe is probably extremely rare, perhaps non-existent. In their 2000 book, Rare Earth, Peter Ward, an atheist, and Donald Brownlee, an agnostic, make this case. In fact, the New York Times review said, maybe we are alone after all. And research the theological facts in all the religions of Western civilization. Man has never been the center of the universe. God always has been the center and forever will be. Next time, origin of life. How did planet Earth get started? Life on planet Earth get started? What does the current scientific evidence show? Hasn't a living cell already been created in the laboratory? So what's the big deal? Is it really that easy? So don't miss out though. Make sure you are subscribed to these video casts, because if you're not, you won't be guaranteed access when the next video cast is available. So until then, this is Stuart Orr reminding you to keep thinking deep, research the evidence and arguments and the conclusions you reach, and follow the trail to wherever it leads.